always give a warning.
Yeah.
That was your warning. You have, 20 seconds before this thing actually. Here we go. Okay. Real quick, I'm gonna throw a curveball. I'm not gonna start off by saying good evening. I'm gonna start off by saying no. I'm gonna start off by saying I know that this will come as an immense shock to all of you, and you just won't be able to believe it at all. But I did make a mistake last week. I know. Wow, so bad. And really, it's one of those things that really doesn't matter at all. But I was looking back over last week's notes, and I noticed in the printed form of my notes that I had mistyped something. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it's okay because maybe I just said it right anyway. So then I went back and I watched the recording, and sure enough, I said it wrong. But if you actually go to, as we were comparing, we were looking at Paul's usage of Hosea with the death wears your sting thing. This was actually 2 weeks ago, I guess. And in like 2 Corinthians 15 or whatever, the sting of death is sin. And I said the sting of death is death, which doesn't make any sense. But I thought that was funny in a way.
Well, see, we didn't even catch it. So
yeah, see, you weren't paying no attention to what I was saying.
Well, we knew what it said.
We knew this.
I did think that was funny. That the sting of death is death. But anyway, so yeah, that is my. I know that you just can't believe that I would possibly mistype something, since all of my handouts are always so perfectly typed. Anyway, now, good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. Okay. Y'all, we are not only finishing Hosea tonight, but we are finishing the Minor Prophets, which is kind of crazy to think about, because when we started with Haggai, that was over 2 years ago, which it doesn't seem that long for me. And they say that as you get older, time goes faster. So I'm sure for some of y'all, it seems like it was last month. But it was over 2 years ago. It was like early May of 2022. Older is the word I said. Older. That's all I said. But it's already like mid-June now. So we've been going at this for like over 2 years. Granted, a not insignificant portion of that time, I was in school from like mid-August to early May, 22 to 23. But we've been, together on my second time around for over a year, since I came back in early May. So yeah, we've definitely, we've spent a lot of time together. If you haven't gotten used to me by now, then I can't help you. There's just no hope. So we're going to wrap up Hosea tonight. Next week, if you remember, the tentative schedule, which like as soon as I printed that was already a little bit wrong. We're back on that tentative schedule. And so we're wrapping up Hosea tonight, Hosea 14. Next week, we're doing a recap of all of the minor prophets. Don't worry, we're not going to be very in-depth at all because, I don't want to be here all night, and I know that you don't as well. And then that leaves us with 5 Wednesdays in July. July's a weird month. It has 5 Wednesdays. So, okay, well, what book of the Bible has 5 chapters? James does. And what's good about that is that that's in the New Testament. So, maybe break up the monotony of the last 2 years a little bit. Let me see. Okay, so on December 20th of 2023 of last year, we celebrated our 40th lesson together because I wore that goofy Christmas outfit, and we had a little celebration for our 40th lesson. Tonight we're celebrating our 68th lesson. So we passed 50, we passed 60, we even passed 65. And this is our final official lesson. So 68 lessons for 67 chapters. Not bad. a few little statistics here for you. We did 2 lessons in Haggai, 1 in Obadiah, 3 in Nahum, 3 in Habakkuk, 3 in Zephaniah, 3 in Joel, 9 in Amos, 4 in Jonah, 7 in Micah, 14 in Zechariah, 4 in Malachi, and after tonight, 15 in Hosea. So Hosea is the only chapter or the only book that we didn't do equivalent to a chapter a night. Because I never actually made up for the fact that I split chapter 1 up into 2 lessons. But oh well. So I actually am, insane in that I did the math on, 68 lessons. How much time is that? And I didn't just play it safe by just guessing, an hour, a lesson times 68. No, I went back and I looked at the YouTube playlist and I counted up hours and minutes because I'm insane and I have too much time in my hands. So, you know what? I write this down because, if most of y'all have been here for the whole study, I think that this is kind of cool. Approximately, we have spent a whopping 3,239.7 minutes together. 3,239.7. That translates to approximately 53.995 hours. So 53 hours, which translates to 2.249 days. So we've spent 2 whole days together with no breaks in the Minor Prophets, or 3,239 minutes, approximately. Not including what we're going to do tonight. So again, if you haven't gotten used to me now, there's no hope for you. We've spent like 3,000 minutes together. There's like, entire TV shows you can watch in that time. But you've chosen to spend your time here at church, and that's a more rewarding thing, hopefully for you anyway. And I know that I've had a lot of fun. This is, Wednesday night, we can be a little bit goofy. It's not as like uptight and professional. And I kind of like that. I've had a lot of fun. I have learned a lot, despite the fact that I give off the aura of being all-knowing. I'm really not. And so I've learned a lot over these, as you suspected. I've learned a lot over these 2 years. Not just from the Minor Prophets, but obviously, especially Zechariah and Hosea, which were, some of the last couple books we covered, were constantly referencing Exodus and Deuteronomy and, the Kings and the Chronicles and all this. And so it made me go back to that stuff and really dig in there. And so this has been a great study, I think. But yeah, we're not done yet. We do have one more lesson. And that is Hosea chapter 14. If you remember, the Hebrew Bible actually started chapter 14 with verse 16 of chapter 13. So we're not going to start with 13:16. We're just going to start with 14:1. But if you notice, right, the last verse of 16 is Samaria is guilty. She has rebelled against her God. And then there's some judgment, right? Very similar to the Shalom stuff we read about earlier. The infants are going to be dashed into pieces and the women with child are going to be ripped open. And then now in 14:1 it begins, but return to the Lord. So you can see kind of the connection there. So starting in 14:1, we're just going to go ahead and read. There's only 9 verses. O Israel, return to the Lord your God, for you have stumbled because of your iniquity. Take words with you and return to the Lord. Say to him, take away all iniquity. Receive us graciously, for we will offer the sacrifices of our lips. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, nor will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are our gods. For in you the fatherless find mercy. I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned away from him. I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall grow like the lily, and lengthen his roots like Lebanon. His branches shall be spread, his beauty shall be like an olive tree, and his fragrance like Lebanon. Those who dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall be revived like grain and grow like a vine. Their scent shall be like the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim shall say, what have I to do with idols? I have heard and observed him. I am like a green cypress tree. Your fruit is found in me. Who is wise? Let him understand these things. Who is prudent? Let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right. The righteous walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. So, all right. First thing that we got is, okay, what is this chapter's relation to the Torah? Genesis through Deuteronomy. If you're a Jew, that would be the written Torah, because they also have the oral Torah, which adds a lot. Some of it kind of whack. But so the Pentateuch is what a lot of Christians would call it. But Genesis to Deuteronomy, right? Again, like I just said a moment ago, Hosea is one of those books that you really have to go back to Exodus and Deuteronomy to kind of understand the context in which Hosea is sort of building his prophecies against Israel. And it's no different in his last chapter, even though this is a bit of a happy chapter, right? A lot of the minor prophets end on a, even if it's not necessarily a positive note, they end on an optimistic note for the future, which you could say is positive, although it's less rooted in the present and more rooted in the future very, often. Okay, the question then is, okay, we talked a lot about the covenantal curses. So is anything that we see here a covenantal blessing, right? Because, there's a whole lot of happy feel-good stuff, right? Like, oh, I will heal them in their backsliding. They shall grow like the lily, right? Your fruit is found in me. That's, that'll preach, as they said in seminary, you read a passage like that. Oh, man, that'll preach, But, is there any relation to what we're reading here and anything from the Pentateuch? Obviously, there is, because you have blanks to fill in. Or not blanks, but you have spaces to write. So go back to verse 2, and I'll just read that real quick. Take words with you, return to the Lord, say to him, take away all iniquity, receive us graciously, for we will offer the sacrifices of our lips. First thing, for number 1, you're going to want to write down Exodus 34, verses 6 through 7. Exodus 34, 6 through 7. Go ahead and flip to Exodus 34 if you want to, because, all of these are in Exodus or Deuteronomy, so, we're going to be camped out there for a little bit. Okay, so Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7 is, number 1 under verse 2. It says, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Verse 7, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. So, if you have a Bible with subheadings, you'll understand the context of this is the new tablets being given to Moses. God is sort of reestablishing the covenant that he's already made with Moses. And part of that is promising to, as you see in 6 and 7, forgive wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And this is exactly the same prayer that Hosea urges Israel to pray, right? There's kind of 3, sections of Hosea 14. So, maybe 4, I guess, if you count verse 1. But verses 2 and 3 are sort of an example prayer that Hosea is giving to the people. Then in verse 4, we have God speaking. I will hear their backsliding. I will love them. And then verse 9 is sort of a poem or maybe more like a proverb almost. We don't know, okay, was this said by Hosea? Was this added on later? We don't really know. But that's sort of the three sections we got going on here. So we're in sort of that first section of this mock or sample prayer of Hosea. And the language that he uses is very similar to what we just read in Exodus 34, right? It says, take away all iniquity, receive us graciously, right? And in Exodus 34, we read, right? God maintains love to thousands, forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. What's even more interesting, going back to Hosea 14, Hosea is urging the people to take words with you. And then in that sample prayer, he says, we will offer the sacrifice of our lips. Which brings us to number 2 under verse 2, which is Exodus 34, 18 through 20. So same chapter, just skipping a few verses. Exodus 34, 18 and 20. Or sorry, 18 through 20. And that reads, celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv. For in the month that you came out of Egypt, the first offspring of every womb belongs to me, including all the firstborn males of your livestock, whether from herd or flock. Redeem the firstborn donkey with the lamb, but if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem all your firstborn sons. And then this is really the significant part. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. And obviously, I mean, this is referencing a festival, but there's still this principle, right, that God demands sacrifice. But Hosea doesn't urge Israel to bring an animal, right? But their words, 14 to the very beginning, take words with you. And then sort of the end in this mock prayer, Hosea and Israel later on saying, right, we will offer the sacrifice of our lips. And we've seen this concept before, right? I mean, Micah 6:8, the throw pillow verse from the minor prophets, act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God, right? It's the same concept, right? So, okay, relation to the Torah, right? 30, sorry, I was really confused because I flipped this way instead of the other way, and I was in a whole different book of the Bible. Exodus 34, 6 and 7, right? Take away iniquity, receive us graciously, or in the words of Exodus, right? God forgives wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And then also 34, verses 18 through 20, right? No one is to appear before God empty-handed. Well, Hosea is saying, right, don't, just return to the Lord and just say, oh, well, we're sorry, right? But at the same time, I mean, don't bring sacrifices. Partly because they're probably going to be in exile when they're saying this, so they can't really bring sacrifices, and we've talked about that idea before. Partly because they've so corrupted the sacrificial system that maybe it's best if that just went away for a little while. And partly because, right, what is the point of sacrifice if your heart is far from God, right? Like we said, going back to Micah 6:8, right? What does the Lord desire? Well, justice, mercy, and walking humbly with God. So moving on into verse 3, I'll read that again. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses, nor will we say any more to the work of our hands, you are our gods. For in you the fatherless finds mercy. So we have Numbers 1 and a number 1 and a number 2 under verse 3 as well. Number 1 is Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 17. Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 17. And go ahead and flip there. Maybe put your pen or something in Exodus, because we're going to be back in Exodus very, very shortly. Unless you just, maybe you just want the exercise of, Bible drills. Deuteronomy 17:14 through 17. It says, when you enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not an Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire a great number of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. So obviously the important part there is the whole horse idea, because we see that in Hosea 14:3. And we talked about this too. Again, repeat themselves, so I repeat myself. But Israel, right, they had a lot of terribly corrupt kings during Hosea's time. The quick succession of kings, well, it was often because they were just killing each other. So obviously, if you ascend to power through murdering someone, that's corrupt. But even beyond that, these kings are the one responsible for a lot of the idolatry, a lot of the religious syncretism that we've been talking about. And so, yeah, they clearly weren't heeding the words of Deuteronomy 17. But right in Hosea's mock or sample prayer in chapter 14, he urges the people to say, we will not ride on horses. And that sounds kind of weird, right? Because in and of itself, seems like a bit of a weird addition, right? Riding a horse isn't bad. I hope not anyway. All of the Amish people, they're out of luck, I guess. But right, when, the words of Deuteronomy 17 were originally given, Israel was still somewhat dependent on Egypt, right? Because it says, do not make the people of Egypt return to get more horses, right? So they're still somewhat dependent on Egypt. You can't exactly make a break away from this place you've been in for hundreds of years and not be at least a little dependent on them, right? And we talked about how, in Hosea's time, Israel's foreign policy, it's constantly shifting. We'll make an alliance with Syria. We'll make an alliance with Egypt. We'll make an alliance with Assyria, right? And it's just, the kings are constantly changing. The foreign policy is constantly changing. But Israel was at least partially dependent on Assyria, right? They sort of made an agreement with Assyria, and then they went back on that. Assyria found out, and that was the end of Israel, right? So they were at least partially dependent on Assyria. And so Hosea's addition of horses might not even be literal, right? The emphasis is probably, we will not depend on other countries, right? The same way that, in Deuteronomy 17, when this is being given, we're not that far removed from the act of the Exodus, not that far removed from the people complaining, if only we would have stayed in Egypt, then we wouldn't be dying in this desert, right? And so God says, when you get a king, he's not going to acquire a lot of horses, and you're not going to make the people go back to Egypt to get more horses when you run out, right? God didn't want them dependent on these other nations for their military power, right? Or more importantly, didn't want them to depend on these other nations for their security and their protection, and instead wanted them to depend on him. And so in Hosea's time, once again, Israel is at least in part dependent on Assyria. So this is probably borrowing the language of Deuteronomy, but it's sort of more of a metaphor, right? We will not depend on other countries. And Hosea is trying to turn the people's attention and their trust, ultimately, not just their attention, back to God, right? Not on Assyria, not on Egypt, not on Syria, not on themselves or their own country's military or political might, but back on God. Second relation to the Pentateuch is Exodus 22, verses 22 to 24. So if you did, like I said, you put a pin in Exodus, we're very close because we were in Exodus 34. Now we're in Exodus 22. So only, maybe a dozen pages or so removed. All right, and that was 22 verses 22 to 24, once again. So starting in 22, do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, children fatherless. So, one of God's covenantal promises that he gave to Moses and to Israel as a whole is that he would hear and ultimately defend or avenge the fatherless. And so Hosea's sample prayer that he gives in chapter 14, it ends with, in you the fatherless find mercy. He hears the cries of those people who are torn apart through war, through exile, through general injustice that has been called out, right? And so in a sense, right, all of Israel would be like a fatherless child. They would be uprooted from their homes just like an orphan, right? But God will avenge, and defend Israel if they return to him, right? We will not ride on horses. We will not depend on other nations. We will not say to the work of our hands, you are our gods, right? If Israel does all this, if they return, right? Because, all of this is sort of prefaced with verse 1. Hosea is saying, return to the Lord your God. So if they return, then, right, in God, the fatherless find mercy. And, through war and exile and injustice, all of Israel is, in a sense, the fatherless. And so this is kind of a covenantal blessing that Hosea is applying for him in the future to Israel, right? To that remnant that repents and turns back to God. All right. That was both of our, 1 and 2 for verse 3. So all we got left is verse 5. And there's a lot more that you can make parallels to. Verse 2, verse 3, and verse 5 are not the only examples of references back to the Pentateuch, but these are just the ones that I was highlighting. So verse 5, I'll reread that. I will be like dew to Israel. I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall grow like the lily and lengthen his roots like Lebanon. Number 1 for verse 5 is Deuteronomy 30. And then got a few verses here. So Deuteronomy 30, verses 1 and 2. And then also verses 9 and 10. So 1 and 2 and 9 and 10 of Deuteronomy 30. So should have had you put something in Deuteronomy because we were in 17 and now we're in 30. But we're staying in Deuteronomy though, so you can take your pen out of Exodus if you still have it in there. All right, so Deuteronomy 30, this is verses 1 and 2. When all the blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, skipping down to verse 9, then the Lord your God will make you prosperous in all the work of your hands and in the fruit of your womb, the young of your livestock and the crops of your land. The Lord will again delight in you and make you prosperous, just as he delighted in your ancestors. Verse 10, if you obey the Lord your God and keep his commands and decrees that are written in this book of the law, and turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. So, one of the covenantal blessings that was promised to those who turn to the Lord was agricultural prosperity, right? We got the livestock and crops mentioned in verse 9. So Hosea 14:5. This is the part where, backing up, starting verse 4, is starting God speaking. So Hosea's sample prayer is over. And then 4 through 8 is God speaking. Sorry, I've lost my place in my notes. Okay, yeah. So 14:5, God speaking. God is using metaphorical language, growing like a lily. That's a simile, but growing like a lily, lengthening his roots, spreading his branches. Right. So not literal language here for agricultural prosperity. These promises in Hosea, right? They're not purely agricultural. It's not, oh well, you're gonna be exiled, but hey, you're the roots of your trees, man, they're gonna be like Lebanon. You're gonna have a lot of dew on the ground in the morning, right? Obviously we understand. This is sort of figurative language going on here. Moving on into number 2 under verse 5, which is Deuteronomy 33. Verse 13, and then verse 23. So Deuteronomy 33, 13, and 23. So starting in verse, yeah, go flip there if you want. Don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take my word for it, since I might have mistyped this. As we've already noted, I have a tendency to type things out wrong. So starting in verse 13, about Joseph, he said, may the Lord bless his land with the precious dew from heaven above and with the deep waters that lie below. And then moving on to verse 23, so Israel will live in safety. Jacob will dwell secure in a land of grain and new wine, where the heavens drop dew. So this is when Moses is blessing the 12 tribes right before he dies. And right, even here, dew is being used symbolically for general prosperity, not just agriculture, right?
What verse did you just read? Yeah.
So
That coordinate with mine.
It wasn't verse 23, was it? Didn't sound like it to me. But
No,
it's a verse. Let me hold on.
22 either.
The first one matched up, right? 1333. Okay. Hold on. Oh, wait. Hold on. I was in Exodus. I need to be in Deuteronomy. That would help. Okay. Okay, 33.
There is no verse 33.
Chapter
It is
33.
Chapter 33, yes.
Verse 13 is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, it's 28.
Okay.
So yeah, 13 was right. 33, 13, and 28. Then Israel shall dwell in safety, the fountain of Jacob alone, in a land of new grain and new wine. His heavens shall also drop dew. So, yeah.
Thank you.
It's funny because I had literally just made reference of how you want to flip there yourselves because I probably mistyped something. And sure enough, I did. So anyway, yeah, you have the agricultural promises, one of the covenantal blessings. We saw that in Deuteronomy 30. And, Hosea is sort of, using agricultural language, but it's not just agriculture, right? Because 3 chapters later, 33, Moses is blessing Israel and, saying, oh, well, the Lord's going to bless him with the dew from heaven. He's going to live in safety with, the heavens dropping dew. And, obviously that's some sort of symbolic language because just the dew of the morning, in a very material sense doesn't exactly provide us with safety. You know, so obviously we understand. Okay, that's at least a little bit figurative, and it's the same instance in Hosea, right? Verse 5. Right, I will be like the dew to Israel. He shall grow like the lily, and his links, and lengthen his roots like Lebanon. Right, this is just symbolic for just general prosperity. Right, agricultural, economical, spiritual. Right, I mean, however you want to apply this.
My NIV says like a cedar of Lebanon. So it's supposed to be like the country or the cedar tree? What's the King James say?
King
So,
James, he just says, and cast forth his roots as Lebanon.
so you says the what?
Like a cedar of Lebanon, he will send down his roots.
Yeah, so I mean it's the same concept. So his lengthen his roots like Lebanon, talking about
The country.
yeah, I mean Lebanon was known for trees. So, you know, will lengthen his roots like Lebanon, you know, I mean, it's like saying will lengthen his roots like Redwood, California. Because you go there and you see these huge tree roots, right?
And Lebanon was very famous for their cedars.
Yeah.
They used the wood in the
The
timber.
cedars of Lebanon. The
Yeah.
Bible says.
So if it, you know, the NIV is just clarifying what's meant here by just adding cedars. If you want to get really, interesting, I thought about bringing this up, and then I thought there's not really any spiritual significance to this. I would just be nerding out. But if you really want to get interesting, right? I am like a green cypress tree. Your fruit is found in me. All right. It's either, you know, depending on what you're looking at, fir tree, cypress tree, or juniper tree. A juniper tree produces berries. A cypress tree produces some type of fruit nut thing, but it's not really edible. And then just generally fir trees don't produce fruit. And the word in Hebrew is pretty much just fir tree. So you have, I am like a green fir tree. Your fruit is found in me. But those trees don't produce fruit. So it's kind of a weird metaphor there. But anyway, like I said, there's really, as far as I know, no spiritual significance to that. It's just interesting. But anyway, go home and study that, you know. I'm sure you'll find something interesting. Okay, so that brings us out of the relation to the Torah or the Pentateuch. You know, we only really hit Exodus and Deuteronomy, but I mean, there have been people that have said, oh, there's, you know, sort of not really a callback, but an allusion to, oh, the Garden of Eden, which would be Genesis. Or, oh, well, there's, you know, something rooted here in, you know, Leviticus or whatever. And like I said, I mean, there's more examples that you can pull from in these verses. This is just what I pulled from. Now we have next subheading I gave you, relation to Israel's sin. We should be well familiar with Israel's sin, not only because Hosea is 14 chapters long, but I mean, we've been, you know, this is our last chapter in the Minor Prophets. And, you know, Israel and Judah, I mean, you know, they were quite alike. So, I mean, you know, you read about the sin that one commits, chances are the other committed it as well. And so we should be well familiar with what their sin is. But it's interesting because, I mean, a lot of, again, go back to, I think it was, you know, if you have your notes for chapter 11, I think that was the one where I gave you sort of these main themes, color-coded, poorly color-coded, but color-coded nonetheless, main themes running through the book of Hosea. And, you know, I mean, it was, you know, here in 14, you have almost the reversal of several of those themes that we sort of trace through the book. And so the first one, number one, Israel is no longer relying on foreign powers but on God alone. And then in parentheses it says, compare 14:3 to, and then you want to fill in chapter 7, verse 1. So I'll read 14:3 real quick. Chapter 14, verse 3. Assyria shall not save us. We will not ride on horses. And we'll stop there because the rest we'll look at for number 2. Then, chapter 7, verse 11. So I just said, we're not going to rely on Assyria. We're not going to rely on the horses. Chapter 7, verse 11 says, Ephraim also is like a silly dove, without sense. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria, right? And that's where we get the, quick changing of foreign policy that we talked about. So they were doing that, they were calling to Egypt, they were going to Assyria. Now, in Hosea's sort of sample prayer, he's urging the people to say, hey, Assyria is not going to save us. We're not going to, ride horses, right? We're not going to rely on these foreign powers. We're going to rely on God. Number 2, relation to Israel's sin. Israel is no longer worshiping images made by human hands. And then compare 14:3 or 14:3b, I guess, to chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. Chapter 8, 5 and 6. And I'll go ahead and read the last half of verse 3 of chapter 14. We will say, nor will we say anymore to the work of our hands, you are our gods. So then going back to chapter 8, verses 5 and 6. Chapter 8, verse 5. Your calf is rejected, O Samaria. My anger is aroused against them. How long until they attain to innocence? For from Israel is even this, a workman made it, and it is not God. But the calf of Samaria shall be broken to pieces. And again, we talked about Jeroboam's golden calves, which were still a problem, even many years later. And not only that, but you had the shrines everywhere, and then just all this different syncretizing of, a little bit false, a little bit true, and create something entirely new. And so, they were, worshiping this calf of Samaria. Now, Hosea is urging the people to say, we will not anymore to the work of our hands say, you are our gods. We will not worship them anymore. We will not call them gods anymore. Or even call them, the dwelling place of Yahweh, right? Because we talked about how the golden calf could be not a god in and of itself, but almost like it's supposed to be the dwelling place of Yahweh. Not even that anymore are they going to do. But this return to, again, one of the themes that we traced, is the importance of the form of worship as much as worship itself, right? So they say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to return to the true form and the true method of worship prescribed in the Pentateuch, right? And then finally, number 3, Israel will return by dwelling under God's shadow. And then in parentheses, compare chapter 14, verse 7 to, and you have 4 blanks here, chapter 8, verse 13, chapter 9, verse 3, chapter 9, verse 15, and chapter 11, verse 5. 13, 9, 3, 9, 15, and 11, 5. All of these I really could have included multiple verse references for, but I just kind of went ham on the last one and just threw in a bunch. So, 8:13. Well, first let me stay there, and then let me read 14:7 real quick. 14:7. Those who dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall be revived like grain and grow like a vine. Their scent shall be the wine of Lebanon. But specifically that idea of dwelling under God's shadow and then returning, right? Compare this to, let's start with 8:13. For the sacrifices of my offerings they sacrifice flesh and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them, nor will he remember their iniquity and punish their sin. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. And then this is the important part. They shall return to Egypt. Right? Now flip on over to chapter 9, verse 3. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt, and shall eat unclean things in Assyria. This is the chapter where we were talking about the reversal of the Feast of Tabernacles, if you remember. So there's no dwelling, right? No rejoicing, all of that. Also, chapter 9, verse 15. All their wickedness is in Gilgal, for there I hated them. Because of the evil of their deeds, I will drive them from my house. I will love them no more. So we talk about, right, driving them from their house, right, being driven out from the land of Israel, right? Go to last one, chapter 11, verse 5. 11:5. He shall not return to the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refuse to repent. So you have, he shall return to Egypt, and then in chapter 11, he shall not return to Egypt. But it's sort of a clarification there of, okay, you're not going to Egypt, you're going to Assyria. In case you couldn't tell that anyway, by all the geopolitics of the time, you're going to Assyria. So, right, it's all this, right, reversal of the Exodus, and even reversal of the conquest, right, that we sort of have been tracing through Hosea. By the time we get to 14, this is God speaking. So this isn't even part of Hosea's sample prayer. This is the direct words of God. Those who dwell under his shadow, or under God's shadow, my shadow, shall return, right? And I mean, obviously, again, you have to balance this out with Israel didn't really return from exile. But I mean, there is a lot of spiritual language here, right? A lot of figurative language. They shall be revived like grain and grow like a vine. Their scent shall be like the wine of Lebanon. So just because you're still in Assyria or wherever you get taken away to doesn't mean that you can't, right, return to God and still be blessed by God wherever you are. Even if that doesn't necessarily include, like we, read about with Judah, this great return from exile in a very literal sense, right? There's still these promises to the faithful remnant of, okay, wherever you are, you can return to me and I will bless you, right? And so that last one isn't really, a relation to Israel's sin as much as relation to the effect of Israel's sin, which is exile and then return from exile. Maybe in a more symbolic sense. Okay, finally, application. Real quick, because, we're almost out of time. So, and I'm just going to give you this, and then if you have anything to add, go for it. What is a common theme at the end of a book of the minor prophets? So, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Micah, Zephaniah, Zechariah, and kind of Malachi. So 7 of the 12 end with an optimistic outlook of the future. And you can even argue for like one more of those, but it's not necessarily talking about the future as much as it is something else, so I didn't include it. But at least 6, if not 7, if not even 8 of the 12 end with an optimistic outlook of the future. So what is the common theme? An optimistic outlook of the future. That's all you got to write. What is the common theme before the end of the book? Well, before the optimistic ending, these books, they all prophesy destruction, they all prophesy exile, or they just call out Israel / Judah's, depending on which book you're in, wickedness and injustice and idolatry, right? So you have Israel / Judah's sin, the effect of Israel / Judah's sin, which is exile and destruction. And then by the time you get to the end of the book, most of the books, by the way, you have this optimistic outlook for the future. So then part 3 of this application, how do these themes encourage us as believers today? Well, they should encourage us because the end of this world has already been written, right? In the present, there is sin, and there is the effects of that sin, right? There's wickedness, there's injustice, there's idolatry, right? Almost everything you read about in the Minor Prophets, to some degree, happens in our world today, right? Whether it's across the world, right? There's hardships that we have to endure. There's sin that exists around us, sometimes even our own. However, the ending is optimistic for those who believe in Jesus Christ, right? In the same way that the Minor Prophets never offer this absolute blanket statement of like, everybody's coming back from exile, and everybody's getting blessed from God, and everybody's going to have their sins forgiven, and everybody's going to grow like the cedars of Lebanon, right? You have to remember it starts with, "O Israel, return to the Lord your God," right? So we're talking about the remnant. We're talking about the people who return. In the same way, for us as Christians, there is an optimistic outlook for the future, but an absolute blanket statement of, believe what you want. You want to syncretize Christianity and Islam? Go for it. You want to syncretize Christianity and Hinduism? Go for it. You want to, commit all sorts of, children or women or, just defenseless people? Go for it. You want to cheat people out of their money? Go for it. Any of these things, right? It never just says, oh, just do whatever you want. And then, at the end of times, God's just going to swear everything away and you'll all be fine, right? No. I mean, there is this optimistic outlook for the future, but only for those people who believe in Jesus Christ, right? So it's very similar, actually, to the Minor Prophets. In that, okay, well, the end of this world and then the beginning of the new world, the new heaven and the new earth, right? It's optimistic, but, at the same time, "Oh, Israel, oh, Talala, oh, wherever, return to the Lord your God," right? Which has to happen now, right? You can't wait until all the crazy stuff from Revelation happens and then try to repent. So anyway, anything else from either the application or just the chapter in general that anyone wants to throw out there?
Israel never learned until they went through trouble, destruction, all that sort of stuff. And we tend to kind of be that same way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you have, on the one hand, I mean, you would think, okay, well, I sin, bad things happen, I would learn from that, but too often, keeping in a more application-oriented sense, as soon as things sort of get back to normal, we sort of get back to normal, right? Our sinful nature normal of, oh, well, this one thing won't hurt. These 2, 3, 4, 5, a dozen things won't hurt, right? And so, unfortunately, fear is a bad motivator. And, I don't believe that the primary purpose of these judgments against Israel and Judah and again, we have to be careful, like I've said, because we can't really pinpoint something that happens today and say, well, that's the judgment of God. But, knowing that does happen, however it happens, you can't, I don't think the primary purpose of God's judgment today or back then was to get people's attention, to try to get them to return, as much as it is God portraying his justice. Obviously, always embedded in that is return to me, like we talked about with the Minor Prophets. But we know most people don't, right? That's why it's called a remnant, because not a lot of people did it. And I think this is an idea that we brought up before. I don't even remember what book it was primarily. But if the only reason that God was punishing people was to get them to return, then I don't want to say it wouldn't make sense, but if there's more to it than just that, God is demonstrating his justice and his his rejection of sin in a very physical way, then regardless of people's response to that, God's purpose is accomplished, right? So anyway, today, y'all have lived longer than I have. So, I'm sure that y'all know all sorts of stuff, about lifetime, right? I was born 4 or 5 months, whatever, before 9/11. And, I don't remember it, but we know historically a lot of churches, right? The numbers shot up. 2002 rolls around, goes down a little bit. 2003 rolls around, goes down a little bit, right? But where I'm living at, right? What happens all the hurricanes, right? And so then, church numbers are going up, right? Because people get scared, right? They think it's the wrath of God, right? And as soon as people get their houses rebuilt, the numbers start going down again, right? But I think that there has to be more to God's intervention in human earth. And again, I'm not saying that 9/11 or Hurricane Katrina or whatever was God's wrath, but there has to be another dimension to God's intervention in humanity than just trying to get people to return, right? Or trying to get people to turn back to him. Even though, obviously, that is a huge emphasis. I think there needs to be some aspect that isn't dependent on human response, because God is not dependent on humanity, right? So anyway, that's your great theological over your head lesson that you can go, that's what we call, a refrigerator lesson, where one of these is your fridge and you're just gonna be like, oh, I get it now, right? Anyway.
Open the door and the light comes on.
There you go. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay.
So.